Hi Reddit. Let me set the scene because this isn't just your everyday betrayal. I'm sharing this story here because I need to get it off my chest and, honestly, I think I just need someone else to hear it who might understand. My wife, the woman I trusted with everything, did the unthinkable. And she did it with my closest friend. But I'm not the kind of guy who just sits back and takes it. This is how it all went down. It started a couple of months ago when my wife, Sarah, began acting a little off. I can't quite put my finger on it, but she suddenly started spending more time out with friends, attending late-night events, and becoming secretive about her phone. Now, Sarah and I had a pretty solid relationship, or so I thought. We'd been together for over a decade, and although things weren't always perfect, I trusted her. After all, trust was the foundation of our marriage, and I never had any reason to doubt her. Then, about a week before everything blew up, she told me about this exclusive party she'd been invited to. She was all excited, saying it was going to be a sophisticated, adults-only gathering hosted by one of her work friends. She wanted me to come with her, saying it would be good for us to spend some time together outside the house, doing something fun. I was skeptical, especially since I hadn't been too fond of these new people she was hanging out with. But for the sake of our relationship, I agreed. The night of the party, I noticed her outfit was a little more revealing than usual, something she'd usually only wear on special occasions with just the two of us. It felt off, but I brushed it aside, thinking maybe she just wanted to feel attractive. We arrived at the house, a massive place on the outskirts of town, secluded and buzzing with music and laughter. She introduced me to some of her friends, and everything seemed fine at first. But then I noticed her talking closely with one of my best friends, Jake. Now, Jake and I go way back. We've known each other since college, and we've always had each other's backs. He's been a constant in my life, through thick and thin. So I didn't think too much of it when I saw them laughing together. But as the night wore on, I started noticing the way she leaned a little too close, the way her hand lingered on his arm just a second too long. I thought I was imagining things, letting my insecurities get the best of me. At one point, I stepped out for some fresh air, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up on me. When I came back, though, I couldn't find Sarah anywhere. I scanned the room, weaving through the crowd, but she was nowhere in sight. And neither was Jake. Finally, I headed toward the back of the house, where there was a private lounge area separated from the main party by a thick curtain. I pulled it aside, and there they were. The scene that greeted me was like something out of a nightmare. She was leaning close to him, whispering something in his ear while he had this smug look on his face, like he was in on a joke that I hadn't been let in on. The room went silent when they noticed me. Sarah looked at me with a startled expression, as if she'd been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. And Jake? He just smirked, the same smirk that used to mean he had my back through anything. Only this time, it felt like a punch to the gut. My blood was boiling, and I could feel my fists clenching at my sides. Without a second thought, I stepped forward, standing between them. I turned to Jake, and with every ounce of restraint I had, I told him he'd better explain himself. Instead of apologizing, Jake just laughed it off, saying, "Come on, man, we were just having a bit of fun." But there was nothing funny about it. I could see from the look in Sarah's eyes that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. There was something darker here, a betrayal that ran deeper than I'd ever thought possible. My hands were shaking with anger, but I kept it together, locking eyes with Jake and telling him, "This is the last time you ever pull something like this." In that moment, it was as if something in me snapped. I felt an intense need to make it clear that I wasn't a man to be disrespected, to be made a fool in front of my own wife. I balled my fist and landed a clean, powerful punch right to his jaw. He staggered back, and for a split second, there was pure shock on his face. I could tell he didn't expect that reaction from me, but I wasn't about to let him laugh off what he'd just done. I didn't want to make a scene, so I just looked at Sarah, the betrayal written all over her face, and said, "We're done here." I turned around and walked out, leaving them both standing there. I could hear her calling after me, but I didn't stop. For the first time, I realized that trust is something that can't be fixed once it's shattered like that. That night changed everything. But the story doesn't end here. In fact, It's only just beginning. When I woke up the next morning, I was still seething. I hadn't gone back to our house after what happened at the party. Instead, I crashed at a cheap motel on the edge of town, trying to sort through the anger and betrayal twisting inside me. My phone had blown up with calls and messages from Sarah, each one more desperate than the last. She was begging me to come home, to talk things through, and understand the situation. But what was there to understand? I'd seen it with my own eyes. Sarah and my best friend, laughing, flirting, acting like I didn't exist. The images from last night kept replaying in my mind, each one hitting me like a fresh slap to the face. I was struggling to grasp how I'd let things get to this point. How had I missed the signs? Or was I just so blinded by my trust in her and in Jake that I'd ignored them? After hours of pacing, I finally headed home, not because I wanted to hear her excuses, but because I needed answers. I walked in, and there she was, sitting on the couch with her hands wringing together, looking like she hadn't slept a minute. When she saw me, she tried to rush over, her face full of regret, but I put up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Sit down, Sarah. You wanted to talk? Fine. Explain to me what I walked in on last night." She looked down, her face flushed with embarrassment or maybe shame. Who knows? After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think, really. Jake and I were just talking, that's all. Maybe we got too close, but it wasn't serious." I shook my head, barely able to contain my frustration. "Talking? You think I'm that stupid, Sarah? I saw you too. It wasn't just talking." My voice was rising, and I could see her flinch with every word, but I couldn't stop. "You were treating me like some kind of joke, like I wasn't even there. So why don't you cut the crap and tell me the truth?" She shifted uncomfortably, biting her lip, clearly realizing her initial story wasn't going to hold up. "Okay, fine," she admitted, her voice now tinged with anger, as if I was somehow the one in the wrong. "Maybe I got caught up in the moment. Maybe I like the attention. But it's because I felt ignored, like you've been distant, too busy with work or your own life. I needed something more, something exciting." There it was. She'd somehow twisted it around, making this betrayal sound like my fault. The audacity of it was unbelievable. "So your solution," I said, my tone icy, "was to embarrass me in front of my own friend? To let him in on some little secret you thought you were hiding from me?" She threw her hands up in frustration, as if she couldn't believe I wasn't buying her story. "It's not like that," she shouted. "It's not. I wasn't trying to hurt you. Things got out of hand, okay?" I took a deep breath, trying to process what she was saying. "Out of hand? Sarah, you were about to cross a line that there's no coming back from. And with Jake, of all people. How could you?" Just then, she said something that shocked me to my core. "Look, maybe I made a mistake, but I don't know why you're making it such a big deal. Maybe you're just not as open-minded as I thought. Maybe I thought you'd be okay with this kind of thing." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. Open-minded? You thought I'd be okay with my wife throwing herself at my best friend at a party? Sarah, this isn't some open relationship discussion. You didn't talk to me about any of this. You just went behind my back." But she just rolled her eyes, like I was the one overreacting. "People do it all the time, you know? It's not such a big deal. Maybe if you let go of your jealousy for once, we could have more fun in this marriage." It was as if I was talking to a stranger. This wasn't the Sarah I'd married, the woman I thought I knew inside and out. The more she talked, the more she revealed a side of herself I had never seen. A selfish, entitled side that seemed to think she could do whatever she wanted, no matter who it hurt. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, grabbing my coat, and looked her dead in the eye. "If you think I'm just going to sit back and let you make a fool out of me, you've got another thing coming. This isn't the end of this conversation, Sarah, but right now, I need to get out of here before I say something I'll regret." I walked out, leaving her alone in that house that now felt more like a prison than a home. As I got into my car, I felt a surge of determination. I wasn't going to be some passive spectator in my own life. If she thought she could turn me into a joke, she was dead wrong. The rest of the day, I stayed away, avoiding calls, thinking about everything she'd said, everything I'd seen. I was trying to figure out my next steps, and every time I thought of Jake, my blood boiled all over again. There would be no escaping this mess without confronting him. He needed to understand that betrayal like this comes with consequences, even if I had to be the one to deliver them myself. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind was racing, replaying the events over and over, trying to make sense of it all. But there was one thing I knew for sure. Jake and I needed to have a little talk. I wasn't about to let him walk away from this with nothing more than a bruised ego. He had been my closest friend for years, practically a brother, and he thought he could just smile and play along in my own marriage. That betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. The next morning, I texted him to meet me at the local coffee shop. His response was quick, almost too eager, and I could tell he wasn't expecting what was coming. I arrived early, choosing a quiet corner away from the other tables, hoping to keep this conversation as private as possible. But as soon as I saw him walk through the door, that familiar smirk on his face, any resolve to stay calm slipped through my fingers. "Hey, man," he greeted me, like nothing was wrong. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. I didn't return the smile. "Sit down," I said, my voice barely more than a growl. He hesitated for a moment, the smirk fading as he took in my expression. Reluctantly, he slid into the seat across from me. "What's up?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but I could see the nervousness in his eyes. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. "What were you thinking, Jake? You think I didn't see what was going on between you and Sarah at the party?" He shifted in his seat, eyes darting around the cafe as if looking for an escape. "Come on, man. It wasn't a big deal. We were just having a bit of fun. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I felt my fists clenching under the table. "Fun? You think it's fun to humiliate me like that? In front of everyone? In my own marriage?" He chuckled, nervously at first, then as if he were laughing at a joke that only he understood. "You've got to loosen up, man. It's not like I was actually going to do anything. Sarah and I were just messing around. She was bored. I was bored, that's all." Messing around? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The casual way he said it, as if it were no more than a harmless prank, made my blood boil even more. "You think you can just toy with my marriage because you're bored? Do you even realize what you're saying?" He shrugged, that smug look creeping back onto his face. "Look, if it bothers you that much, then I'm sorry. But honestly, I think you're overreacting. Sarah's a grown woman. She can make her own choices." His words hit me like a slap. The lack of remorse, the way he was treating this whole situation as a joke. It was like he didn't even see the betrayal. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't care. I took a deep breath, trying to keep myself under control. "I trusted you, Jake. We've been through everything together. And you repay me by trying to ruin my marriage? You have no respect for me, do you?" At this, his smirk turned into a sneer. "Maybe you should have paid a little more attention to your wife then. If she's bored, that's not my fault, is it?" I saw red. I didn't even realize I'd stood up until I was towering over him, fists clenched at my sides. Every instinct was telling me to walk away, to keep it civil, but the way he looked at me, the arrogance in his face, was more than I could handle. Without thinking, I leaned down and, in a low voice, said, "You're going to regret this, Jake. You think you can just laugh it off, but there are consequences for what you did. You don't get to mess with my life and walk away unscathed." His smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw a flash of fear in his eyes. But he quickly covered it up, standing to face me. "Oh, yeah? And what are you gonna do? Huh? Throw a punch?" I didn't give him the satisfaction of an answer. I'd already made my decision. With every ounce of control I had, I threw a clean, hard punch straight to his jaw. It was controlled, precise, a reminder that I wasn't someone to be crossed. The shock in his eyes was priceless. He staggered back, clutching his jaw, and for the first time, the smirk vanished completely. "Don't you ever come near me or my wife again," I said, voice steady, feeling a sense of closure settle over me. "You're dead to me." Leaving him standing there in the cafe, I walked out, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle over me. This wasn't the end. I knew there was still Sarah to confront, still a lot of pieces to pick up, but at least I'd taken back a piece of my dignity. I drove home with my head buzzing, a mix of adrenaline and anger still coursing through me. Confronting Jake had felt like a release, a way to reclaim a piece of myself he'd tried to take. But the other half of this mess was waiting at home. Sarah. As soon as I walked through the door, I found her sitting on the couch, looking as though she'd been waiting for me all day. Her eyes were red and swollen, like she'd been crying for hours. Part of me felt a pang of pity, but it was quickly overpowered by the memory of her cozying up to Jake, treating me like some kind of joke. She stood up as I entered, wringing her hands nervously. "I was so worried about you," she began, her voice shaking. I raised a hand to stop her. "Don't. I'm not here for excuses or empty apologies. I'm here because I want the truth. No more lies, no more games. Tell me what was going on between you and Jake." My voice was sharp, but I kept it steady. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation again. She swallowed hard, looking down as though she couldn't bear to meet my eyes. I didn't mean for it to get so out of hand. I swear. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Then what was it supposed to be? I demanded, feeling the anger rise up in me again. You think you can just have fun with my best friend behind my back and expect me to look the other way? Explain to me how that makes sense, Sarah. She took a shaky breath, still avoiding my gaze. I don't know, she whispered, barely audible. It started out harmless. We were just friends. You were always working, always busy. I felt alone. Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I thought she might actually be telling the truth, but I couldn't let myself fall for it. Alone? I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. So your solution was to humiliate me in front of everyone? To pull Jake into our marriage and try to make me look like a fool? I don't buy it, Sarah. Her face twisted with frustration. It wasn't about humiliating you. You don't understand. Jake was there when you weren't. He listened. He cared. Listened? I scoffed. That's your excuse? Because he listened? You don't throw away a marriage for a listening ear, Sarah. This is deeper than that. You wanted something more, and instead of coming to me, you went to him. You think that's justifiable? She finally looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and defiance. I needed something you weren't giving me. I wanted to feel alive again. You used to be that person, but somewhere along the line, you stopped caring. That hit harder than I'd expected. I knew work had been taking up more of my time lately, but I'd thought we were still on solid ground. I thought we'd had an understanding that even if things weren't perfect, we were still in it together. But now, hearing her say those words, it was like she was blaming me for her betrayal. You could have talked to me, I said, my voice barely a whisper. If you felt neglected, we could have worked on it. But instead, you chose to go behind my back with someone I trusted. You don't get to put this on me, Sarah. This is on you. For a moment, I thought I saw genuine remorse in her eyes, a flicker of understanding for the pain she'd caused. But then she spoke, her voice cold and defensive. You're right. Maybe it was a mistake. But you're not completely innocent either. You drove me to this, even if you don't want to admit it. I felt my fists clench at my sides. She was still trying to turn this around, to make it sound like I was somehow responsible for her actions. I'm done listening to your excuses, Sarah. You want to feel alive? Fine. But you can't expect me to stand by and watch while you do it at my expense. There was a long silence between us, each of us caught up in our own thoughts. Finally, I spoke again, my voice steadier than before. Here's what's going to happen. I'm moving out for a while. I need time to think, to process everything you've done. And I don't want to see Jake or hear from him again. I'll be filing for separation. Her face crumbled, and for the first time, I saw genuine panic in her eyes. No, you can't mean that. We can fix this. We can work through it. Please, don't leave. I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of finality wash over me. You made your choice, Sarah. You decided that Jake was worth risking everything we had. Now you're going to have to live with the consequences." Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the room. The weight of what I was doing settled heavily on my shoulders, but I knew it was the only choice. I couldn't stay in a marriage where trust had been shattered, where respect had been thrown out the window. As I left the house, I felt a strange sense of freedom, as if I was finally taking control of my life again. This was only the beginning, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let anyone, especially not Jake or Sarah, take away my dignity. It had been a week since I left Sarah and filed for separation. I'd moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, just to get some space and clear my head. Every day felt like a battle to shake off the memories of everything that had happened, but I was starting to find my footing again. I'd been through too much to let this break me. One evening, I was packing up some things from the house, mostly my clothes and some important documents, when I came across an old photo of us. We were younger, happy, with nothing but possibilities ahead. I felt a pang of regret mixed with anger. I had truly loved this woman, and she'd thrown it all away in a moment of carelessness. But instead of letting it crush me, I put the photo down, reminding myself that I deserved better than living in the shadow of her betrayal. I had just finished packing when my phone buzzed. It was an unfamiliar number, but something told me to pick up. "Hello?" I answered, bracing myself for anything. There was a long pause before the voice on the other end spoke. "It's Jake." His voice was low, almost defeated. For a moment, I felt a surge of anger just hearing his voice again. Part of me wanted to hang up, to cut him out of my life for good. But another part of me, maybe the part that still wanted closure, decided to hear him out. "What do you want, Jake?" I asked, my tone cold and direct. He hesitated. I just wanted to apologize. For everything. I don't know what I was thinking. I never wanted to hurt you. I just got caught up in the moment, I guess." I clenched my jaw, fighting back the urge to yell at him. "Caught up in the moment? You betrayed me, Jake. You crossed a line you can't come back from. You think a simple sorry is going to fix that?" "I know it's not enough," he said, his voice shaky. "But I need you to know that it was never about trying to hurt you. It was stupid, selfish, and I hate myself for it. I've lost your friendship, and I don't blame you for walking away." I could hear the regret in his voice, but it was hard to tell if it was genuine or if he was just trying to ease his own guilt. "Jake, you threw away years of friendship over what? A thrill? Some twisted idea of fun? You didn't just betray me. You humiliated me." There was silence on the other end, and I could almost picture him, head hung low, realizing the gravity of what he'd done. "I understand if you never want to see me again. I deserve that. But please, just know that I'm sorry. I know it means nothing now, but I needed you to hear it." I took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. Maybe he really did regret it. Maybe he was just trying to save face. But either way, I wasn't about to let him back into my life. "Apology accepted, but it doesn't change anything. We're done, Jake. I hope you figure yourself out, but don't contact me again." With that, I hung up, feeling a strange sense of relief. It didn't fix the hurt, but it felt like a step forward, a way to finally close the door on that chapter. I didn't need to carry the weight of his apology. I had my own life to rebuild. Over the next few days, I focused on putting myself back together. I reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years, people who'd been part of my life long before Sarah or Jake. They welcomed me back with open arms, offering support and encouragement that reminded me I wasn't alone in this. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter, more like myself again. One evening, as I was sitting in my apartment, my phone buzzed with another message. This time, it was from Sarah. I hesitated before opening it, not sure if I was ready for whatever excuse or attempt at reconciliation she'd try to throw at me. But curiosity got the best of me. The message read, "I know I hurt you, and I know it's probably too late, but can we please talk? I made a mistake, and I'd do anything to fix it." I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to respond, to let her know just how deeply she'd hurt me, to see if she truly understood the pain she'd caused. But another part of me knew that talking to her would only bring back the anger, the resentment, the betrayal that I'd worked so hard to move past. After a long moment, I typed out a response. "There's nothing left to fix, Sarah. You made your choice, and I'm making mine. I'm moving on." I hit send, feeling a strange sense of liberation. I wasn't doing this for her. I was doing it for me. I was finally taking control of my life, choosing to let go of the pain and focus on the future. As I put down the phone, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I was done being defined by her choices or Jake's betrayal. I was ready to move forward, to rebuild, and to find strength in standing on my own. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of adjustments. I was getting used to living on my own, setting up my apartment, and getting back into a rhythm that felt right for me. I started picking up old hobbies I'd neglected over the years, like hiking and reading. Things that once brought me peace but had somehow gotten lost in the noise of everyday life. I was learning, bit by bit, what it meant to be my own person again, without the shadow of Sarah's betrayal hovering over me. One day, while going through my things, I found an old notebook. I used to write down goals, dreams, things I wanted out of life. There were so many plans I'd made, most of which I'd set aside for the right time, which I realized now had just been an excuse to avoid making changes. Seeing my old dreams reignited a spark in me. I decided then and there that I was going to start pursuing the life I wanted. No more waiting around. I began hitting the gym regularly, focusing on my physical and mental health, investing time in my own growth. For the first time in years, I felt strong, focused, like I was finally in control. Friends noticed the change and commented on how I seemed lighter, more alive. It felt good to hear that, to know that people were seeing a side of me I thought I'd lost. Then, one evening, as I was getting back from the gym, I noticed a message notification from Sarah. I felt my stomach twist, but curiosity won out. Her message was brief. "Can we meet? I need to talk to you." A part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep moving forward without looking back. But another part of me, maybe the part that wanted real closure, decided to hear her out. I agreed to meet her at a local cafe, a public place where I'd feel grounded. When I arrived, she was already sitting there, looking different from the last time I'd seen her. She looked tired, worn down, like the weight of everything she'd done had finally caught up with her. She offered a small, hesitant smile as I sat down, but I didn't return it. I was here for answers, not pleasantries. "Thanks for coming," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I know I don't deserve it, but I needed to see you, to talk about everything." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. She had to face the consequences of her actions, just as I'd been doing. She took a shaky breath and began to speak, her words pouring out in a jumbled mess of regret and apologies. "I can't believe I was so selfish. I let my own insecurities ruin everything we had. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. I wish I could go back and undo it all." I listened, letting her words sink in, but I couldn't ignore the deep pain that still lingered. "Why, Sarah?" I finally asked, my voice calm but firm. "Why did you choose Jake? Why did you think it was worth risking everything?" She looked down, fidgeting with her hands. I think I just got lost. I was looking for excitement, for something that made me feel alive, and I thought Jake was the answer. I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late. I know that doesn't make it right, but I was confused, and I made a terrible mistake. I shook my head, still struggling to wrap my mind around it. We all get confused, Sarah. We all go through hard times. But not everyone decides to throw away the people who care about them. You made a choice, and now we both have to live with it. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know. I've lost you, and I'll never forgive myself for that. I don't deserve a second chance, but I wish I could find a way to make it right. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for her. But then I remembered the hurt, the betrayal, the countless nights spent wondering what I'd done to deserve this. I couldn't just forget everything and start over. I was moving forward, and I wasn't about to let her pull me back. I appreciate your apology, Sarah, I said, my voice steady. But there's no going back. I've started rebuilding my life, and I intend to keep moving forward. This chapter is over for me, and I think it's time you accept that too. She looked crushed, but she nodded, understanding that this was the end. I'm sorry, she whispered, barely able to meet my gaze. I stood up, feeling a sense of finality wash over me. Goodbye, Sarah. I hope you find what you're looking for. As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange sense of peace. I'd gotten the closure I needed, the final confirmation that I was on the right path. There would be no more looking back, no more what-ifs. I was finally free. With Sarah and Jake behind me, I poured my energy into building a new life. I started working on some personal projects, including one dream I'd had for years: opening my own business. It was something I talked about with Sarah once, but she'd never fully supported the idea, always dismissing it as too risky. Now, with nothing holding me back, I felt empowered to take the leap. I started making plans, working late nights to develop my business idea and connect with potential partners. Every step I took felt like a victory, a reclaiming of my independence and self-worth. I was doing this for myself, proving that I could build something meaningful without anyone's approval. One evening, after a long day of planning, I got a call from an old friend, Kyle, someone I hadn't seen in years. He'd heard about everything that had happened and wanted to catch up. We met up for drinks, and it felt like old times, laughing, sharing stories, remembering who I was before all of this happened. Kyle reminded me that I was more than Sarah's husband, more than Jake's friend. I was my own person, and I was rediscovering that. As the weeks went by, I found myself surrounded by a new circle of supportive, genuine people who had my back. I began to realize just how much I'd been missing, how I'd let my life become defined by other people's expectations. Now, I was living for myself, creating a future I could be proud of. Looking back, I couldn't believe how far I'd come. The pain of betrayal had been overwhelming, but it had also forced me to confront parts of myself I'd neglected. I'd learned the importance of boundaries, of self-respect, of never settling for less than I deserved. This experience had hardened me, but it had also shown me the strength I never knew I had. One night, as I was going through my things, I found another old photo of Sarah and me, a reminder of the life we'd shared. But instead of feeling the pain of loss, I felt a strange gratitude. That chapter of my life was over, but it had led me to where I was now, a place of resilience, confidence, and peace. I continued building my business, pouring my heart and soul into it. Every success felt like a personal victory, a testament to my ability to thrive despite everything that had happened. I was happier, more fulfilled, and finally living life on my terms. The betrayal that once defined me had become just a part of my story, a reminder of how far I'd come. Friends started noticing the change in me, commenting on how much lighter, more alive I seemed. And for the first time in a long time, I believed them. I'd found my way back to myself, and I was ready for whatever came next. Months turned into years, and the pain of betrayal faded into a distant memory. I was thriving, surrounded by friends who genuinely cared, and building a life that was entirely my own. I'd learned that I didn't need validation from anyone, that my worth came from within. And as I looked around at the life I'd built, I realized that I was finally at peace. I wasn't the same person I'd been before, but I was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I'd faced the worst, and I'd come out the other side, ready to embrace the future with open arms.